when I met you in that conference, it was like a lot of stuff you did was different. Yeah.
I mean, I was never going to follow a traditional path. The one thing that I think my parents instilled in me at a very early age. I mean, we all go through crises in generations.
Mm-hmm.
The global financial crisis is one generational crisis. In my generation, it was the big recession that hit New Zealand in the early 80s, where people were being made redundant. The country was pretty much on the verge of bankruptcy. It was a terrible time, terrible situation. My parents worked 2 jobs each just to pay the bills. And in fact, Mum worked 3 jobs during the course of 7 days. So she'd work for the Ministry of Transport during the day, she'd pour beers at the local club at night, and then during the weekend she'd do coffee and sandwiches at a cafe in Maidstone Mall. Dad was a rubber worker at the Dunlop's tyre factory during the week, and at nights he'd do plumbing, and on weekends he'd do roofing. I had my first business at the age of 13, and it was a native plant business. My grandmother had a whole lot of plastic pots in her garage. We lived next to a reserve, and I went next door and basically pinched a whole lot of native plants, potted them in these pot plants, and went and knocked on people's doors selling my pot plants for $5 each, until I knocked on the door of a council officer, and he said, "Where did you get those plants from?" And I said, "Oh, next door to my house." And that business came to an abrupt halt. Lucky I was underage and I wasn't going to get arrested. Then my grandfather had sugar sacks. That's what the old things that potatoes used to come in. And we lived again near a reserve and a pine tree plantation. And on pine trees come pine cones, and pine cones are great to burn during winter in people's fires. So I used to stack my little pine cones in my sugar sacks, and I'd go selling them for $10 a pop. So that's because we didn't have pocket money really.
So you had to survive. You had to fend.
It wasn't a case of survival. It was a case if you wanted anything extra, you had to work to get the anything extra. I was doing all these crazy things at school. I was very fortunate. The school I went to was actually pretty cool. And they had a Young Enterprise Foundation program there. So you get together with your mates in business studies class, and you form your own business. And ours was a complete dismal failure, and I accept total responsibility for it. And ours was a boxer short business. And boxer shorts were pretty big back then. You know, patterned boxer shorts with frogs and elephants and God knows what other crap on them. And we managed to hook up with a supplier called Haynes, the boxer short company. And they gave us all these free samples, and I thought I was in heaven because we got more orders than we had free samples for. So the business was going to go bust. Obviously that's when you learn a little bit about what you should and shouldn't do in business. But I mean, in each one of those things, I learned more from the try and fail than I did in a textbook on business studies and economics at school. You know, and the power of relationships and networking. I was very fortunate to go to a school where there were people from all around the world, and that was probably the most valuable experience I had.
You started Drake, $1 billion recruitment company.
Yeah, I mean, I was 36. I think I was about 36 or 37. I think I was younger when I was the head of Drake.
You've got a big scope. Because I see you either one minute you're doing recruitment, one minute you're doing Entre Hub, one minute you're doing a radio show, and then the other minute you're sitting down with the Vice Prime Minister of Taiwan. When you look at people to model, when you look at successful people to model, you're going to look at someone that relates to your value. And now I'm an immigrant. You know, I'm obviously an immigrant. I'm second generation, but there is people who just allude to it. And when I see the posts that you talk about what you told me, what you did in the mining, in WA, there's people who are doing everything commercially, but there's people who are doing things for what they believe in.
I think you've got to consider a couple of things. Number one, I'm a big fan of what we call disruption theory. That people who have been doing things in a traditional way for a very long time, there comes moments when you've got to try something different because things aren't working. So I'm a big believer in trying to find disruptive ways and ideas and means of doing things, and it's purely that simple. The second thing that's really part of my core character is I'm a fundamental believer in everything needs to be treated as an adventure. Everything's got to be an adventure. If it's not, then the world gets a little bit too formula related. You know, I don't mind 1 + 1 equaling 47 on the odd occasion. I don't mind, people doing things and failing and getting themselves going again. And it's an adventure. The third thing, which is really core to my belief system, is I'm actually very faith-based. Not a lot of people know this.
Okay.
I'm very faith-based. Faith is not a religion for me. Faith is something, and this is how I roll. There is something bigger. I don't know what it is. I'm not prepared to put a name to it, but I just have an immense amount of faith that there is something bigger than each one of us or all of us combined. And I'm happy with that. So I'm always trying to figure out what that something bigger is. And ultimately, I hope to put a name to it.
People call it universe. I've seen people call it.
Well, call it the universe, call it God, call it whatever you want to call it. I am a man of faith. I have a fundamental faith that there is something bigger than each of us. And therefore, I have faith in everybody I come into connection with and helping them realise their full potential just in case they are the one big thing. And you've got to roll like that, because if you don't, you don't have faith in much at all. Faith breeds confidence. Confidence in reverse breeds faith. It's in the fourth and the final one, is based on all of those things. And if somebody tells me that I can't do something or I will never be able to do something, I'll say, well, based on number 1, 2 and 3 of my core belief system, I think you're wrong, and I'm now going to prove that you're wrong.
Use examples. You never touched radio before, have you?
No.
Well,
This is crazy. This is crazy shit going on here.
For 7 months, you got the highest.
Well, I tell people I have, but I never thought I'd be in radio. I never strived to be on radio. I'm not striving to have a career in radio. What I'm striving to do is put together good quality content that's interesting to an audience, because I believe that's what's interested in. That's what they're interested in. Yeah. And if they buy into that, then by default we're going to have a successful show. And that's why the show is actually not about me. Yeah. You'll never hear me trying to sell something that I've got that I could pitch and make money from. The show is very much about everybody else but me, I think. People who strive to be successful and they focus on how much money they're going to make will never make any money. You will never make any money by that being the end goal and the end target. But if you concentrate on being successful at one thing or two things, then money is nothing more than an outcome of that success, not the other way around. And when you focus on the money side of things, you just become one of these greedy, nasty Wall Street type bankers who steal and rip people off.
If you look at the Wikipedia, it's like the first thing is Matthew Tukaki is a business person. But I met you. I mean, maybe the way we met, it was at a slightly political, social event, but now this is like how have you defined yourself?
Some call me a successful business person, which I laugh at because I failed more often than I succeeded when it comes to business, let me tell you. You might read all the wonderful stories about all the successes, but let me tell you, I've had some really horrible downfalls. But I picked myself up and I've dusted myself off and I've just got on with it. I like to call myself an engineer. So I'm just an engineer. I'm just engineering different things every single day. I'm not too sure whether or not I'm a successful engineer just yet. That'll be for other people to decide. The premise of an engineer is to get something from point A to point B a lot more efficiently than is currently happening. So, you've got this pipe system that goes squiggly like all of this. I can't understand why you just can't go from here to there and cut all the in-between out. So that's what suicide prevention is all about, the work I do in mental health. It's certainly what I'm trying to do with Indigenous economic development. I'm a big proponent of women's empowerment. I cannot understand for the life of me why there is a gender pay gap. I just don't get that. That's just complete nonsense. There are no excuses for it at all. And I was born in a country that was the first to give women the vote. And where each one of the role models in my own family are strong, independent women who didn't necessarily need their husbands or the menfolk to pay the bills and keep the lights on in the house. So I'm interested in how we re-engineer things to make sure that the problems that we face today, we don't have to face tomorrow. Because I also don't believe in intergenerational timelines. It's going to take a generation to fix something. That's just bollocks. That's just nonsense.
So it's like you've covered so much content. Like I've that's one thing is that most people they're stuck with one label, but the fact that you've unlabeled yourself allows you to move between mediums and platforms so quickly.
Although you'll find that everything is loosely connected, and you've got to have a very open mind about how this stuff works. So you think about the radio show now today, the stuff that I'm doing today. We're presenting content that, when you really have a look at the content that we're putting out there, they're inspiring stories from not only everyday Australians, but Australians who are willing to go out there and have a go, mixed with those who have already been successful. There's nothing like an inspiring story to get everybody else inspired. And the premise of the content is very much about putting out there that each one of us is a role model in somebody else's life. You don't need to be a famous sports person to be a role model in somebody else's life. So, for example, Donnie, you might be a role model for your next door neighbour and you don't necessarily realise it. And so what are all the underlying qualities that people look in role models? Well, it's the content of the show. The work with the UN that I did was very much about, again, how do we re-engineer the system to highlight the inspiring things that are going on out there, rather than just hearing about all the bad news stories all of the time. And therefore, could this program that's working successfully in India work successfully in Yogyakarta in Indonesia, or in Kerala State in northern India, or whatever? And so that's really what it's about. Everything is actually, when you sit down and have a look at my career to date, you'll actually find that there are pretty large threads holding it all together.
The way I interpret it, it's started with business, and once you had the business success, you use that energy to channel into stuff that you've always felt more strongly about, to basically transmit for the voices of the people that you felt need. That's how I don't know the whole.
Yeah, no, that's right.
That's why I interpret it.
I can see how people get the interpretation, because really, at the end of the day, in my own mind, I'm the only one that knows where this whole thing is going. I think from the outside looking in, people do become confused. But you've done all these things. In fact, people say, "I don't believe you." I'll never forget somebody. I was in New York, and I was about to have dinner with the Swedish ambassador to the UN, and this lady came up to me, and she was a member of his staff, and it went something like this: well, I don't believe that you're the UNGC representative, you know, blah blah blah. And I said, no, I guarantee I am, because I didn't have any ID. So I was elected in April in Geneva, and then my first meeting was in New York only about a week or two later. So you don't go through the process of getting all your ID organised within a couple of days. You know, it's not like state parliament in New South Wales. And she called security on me.
Wow.
And I was escorted from the building.
Wow.
Because she just didn't believe that I was the guy. Because I also looked quite dishevelled. I decided that I didn't want to, I didn't want to really dress up for the occasion. And so people from the outside looking in do become a little bit confused.
But it's important, because I think one thing about you have strong values that you're not willing to, you're not going to dress up for someone else. People either take that's the message I get. It's either got to be, you got to buy me for who I am and for what I believe in.
That's right.
And don't try and put me what the story you told me about what happened in the mines in Western Australia. It's ought to be, if you hire me, this is Matthew Tukaki. I'm not a puppet for other voices. That's the message I get.
That's right. One of it is this. This is my journey and my adventure. Each one of us have our own journeys and our own adventures. Sometimes they intersect. Sometimes they don't. More often than not, in fact, they don't intersect. We're the only ones who can best judge what the final destination will be, because that's what we're working towards. And what we do is we try and find people along the way that can help us get to where we need to be. In my case, I know what the destination is. I know what the destination is. And I guess what I'm trying to do is surround myself with people that can help me get to that final point. Now, hopefully that final point will be still a while away yet. But I think that's what we have to do. We have to realise that we're not living somebody else's life. We can't live vicariously through other people, like all these people with inspirational quotes all around the place. So we've got to be very careful that we lead our own life and live our own life, and not try to live somebody else's, or live the life that somebody else wants us to live. And if I would leave one final piece of advice, I would say continuously think outside the square. Continuously, love the fact that we all fail. There's nothing wrong with failure. We all do it. I've done it often. You pick yourself up, you dust yourself off, you move on. And surround yourself with people who, as I said before, can get you to where you need to be.